Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1: An Unexpected Invitation. The October evening was one of those damp and restless nights when London seemed to shrink beneath its own weight of fog and rain. The gas lamps outside Hercule Poirot's flat burned faintly, their glow swallowed by the mist that coiled around the streets like ghostly fingers. Poirot, however, sat in immaculate comfort, ensconced in his favourite chair, polishing his moustaches with the utmost satisfaction. He was considering, not for the first time, the deficiencies of English domestic service when the bell rang. His manservant, George, appeared with a silver tray upon which lay an envelope, unusually ornate and sealed with a heavy blob of red wax. Poirot lifted his eyebrows. "But this, mon ami, is most old-fashioned. A letter such as this is rarely seen outside the novels of your Sir Walter Scott." The envelope bore his name in a spidery hand, Monsieur Hercule Poirot, Esquire, and an embossed crest upon the flap, the raven with wings outstretched. Poirot broke the seal with delicate precision, unfolded the thick paper, and read aloud. "Monsieur Poirot, your reputation has reached me even in my seclusion. I must entreat you to come to Ravenscroft Hall without delay. A crime has not yet been committed, but I fear it is near at hand. The danger circles ever closer. If you will lend me your skill and discretion, I shall be in your debt. Lady Amelia Harwood." Poirot tapped the paper lightly against his knee, his eyes gleaming with interest. "A crime not yet committed, George. Do you hear? How rare, how stimulating. The good lady speaks as if she invites me to prevent a tragedy that is still in the womb of time." George, unruffled, merely said, "Shall I make the travel arrangements, sir?" "Indeed you shall. I have the sense that Lady Amelia is a woman of some drama. And where there is drama," Poirot's moustaches bristled, "there is also psychology. We shall see, George, whether the crime waits patiently for Hercule Poirot to arrive, or whether it hurries forward to meet him." The following afternoon found Poirot travelling through Surrey by hired motorcar, the countryside cloaked in shades of russet and gold. The lanes twisted like serpents, wet leaves clinging to the wheels as the mist pressed low upon the hedgerows. When at last Ravenscroft Hall appeared, it rose stark against the grey horizon, a great stone house with narrow windows and ivy climbing its flanks like dark veins. As the driver pulled up before the entrance, Poirot noted the details at once: the gates of wrought iron in the shape of ravens' wings, the carved lintel above the great oak door, and the sense, ineffably, that the house did not welcome its visitor but tolerated him with sullen resignation. The door was opened by a solemn maid, who led Poirot into a high-ceilinged hall adorned with sombre portraits. The air was chill, smelling faintly of damp stone and something sharper, a tang that suggested disuse or neglect. Lady Amelia Harwood awaited him in the drawing-room. She was an imposing figure despite her frailty, dressed in heavy black silk, her hair coiled in austere fashion. Her eyes were piercing, bright with a feverish intensity that belied her trembling hands. "Monsieur Poirot," she said in a voice that cracked like brittle glass. "You are prompt. I did not dare to hope you would come so swiftly." Poirot bowed with the grace of an old-world courtier. "But of course, madam. To receive such a letter, how could I resist? You tell me that a crime, it hovers in the air. I come, therefore, to breathe the same air, to see what it conceals." She gestured for him to sit. The drawing-room was richly furnished but carried the gloom of faded grandeur, heavy curtains blocked what little daylight remained, and a great cabinet of dark wood stood against one wall, its keyhole gleaming faintly. Lady Amelia leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You will think me mad, monsieur, yet I assure you I am not. For weeks I have felt it, a presence in this house. Not a ghost, though heaven knows Ravenscroft is old enough to harbour one, but something nearer, something human. I am watched. And I am certain that one among those who dwell here plots my ruin. Poirot inclined his head, his eyes narrowing with polite attentiveness. You believe, madam, that someone you know, someone close to you, desires your death? Her thin lips quivered. Yes. At that moment, the door opened, and a tall, dark-haired man of perhaps 35 entered with the air of one who resents intrusion. My son, Henry, Lady Amelia said, with a touch of weariness. Henry, this is Monsieur Poirot, whom I have engaged for private reasons. Henry Harwood bowed stiffly, his expression closed. Private reasons indeed. Forgive me, Monsieur Poirot, but I fear my mother is given to. He paused, then finished with a half-smile that did not reach his eyes. Imagination. Poirot rose and offered his hand. Ah, but imagination, it is a gift most useful to a detective. Perhaps, monsieur, you too shall come to value it. Henry's handshake was brief, cold. He muttered something about estate matters and departed with evident relief. Poirot resumed his seat. Lady Amelia's hands trembled against her lap. Do you see? Even he would make me appear foolish. But I am not, Monsieur Poirot. Strange things occur. Objects moved. Doors unlocked. And, she faltered, then whispered, last week, I found upon my pillow a white feather. Do you understand the meaning? Poirot considered her gravely. It may mean much, or it may mean nothing at all. But we shall discover, madam. Rest assured, Hercule Poirot will not permit that a crime is committed while he is under your roof. Lady Amelia's shoulders eased, though her eyes remained shadowed. At that instant, another figure entered, a young woman with fair hair, timid eyes, and the air of one perpetually on edge. My companion, Miss Clara Fielding, Lady Amelia explained. She is devoted, though nervous. Clara, you will assist Monsieur Poirot in any way he requires. Clara curtsied faintly. Her gaze lingered on Poirot for a moment, wide and anxious, before darting away as if she feared to be caught in some unspoken thought. Poirot, his head cocked slightly, observed this with interest. Already the hall and its inhabitants breathed secrets, each face concealing a private tension. The detective's little grey cell stirred with anticipation. Outside, the mist pressed heavier against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a raven croaked. Poirot smiled faintly. Yes, he murmured to himself, there is much here to interest Hercule Poirot. And with that, the game began. Chapter 2, Ravenscroft Hall. The following morning, a fine drizzle hung over the countryside, blurring the outlines of fields and hedgerows as the motorcar conveyed Poirot from the modest inn where he had spent the night to the gates of Ravenscroft Hall. The house, glimpsed through the mist, had an air of solemn defiance, as though it stood in challenge to the centuries that had weathered it. Even the iron gates seemed heavy with meaning. Wrought into the design of their bars were wings of ravens, spread wide, their eyes rendered as black glass beads that glimmered dully in the weak light. Poirot noted them with a small tightening of his lips. Always the symbolism, he murmured to himself. It is a house that wishes to intimidate, to proclaim itself as fortress, as legend. But sometimes, hein? It is not the house that intimidates, it is the people within. The car rolled up the gravel drive, crunching softly under the tires. From a distance, the tall windows seemed darkened by their own depth, and ivy clung to the grey stone as though trying to strangle the life out of it. When at last the motor car halted before the front steps, Poirot stepped down with his usual neat precision, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the damp. He was greeted by the same solemn maid he had glimpsed the night before, her eyes cast down, her voice barely above a whisper. "This way, sir. Her ladyship is waiting in the morning room." As they passed along the echoing corridors, Poirot observed everything: the worn carpet along the edges of the hall, the heavy smell of polish overlaying a subtler odor of mildew, the curious absence of fresh flowers despite a house that clearly employed staff. The walls were crowded with portraits of stern men in naval uniform and pale women in jewels, all painted in the same style that froze them forever in dignified severity. Their eyes seemed to follow him, and Poirot, though not a man inclined to superstition, acknowledged the deliberate impression. Lady Amelia received him with her usual strained dignity, though he thought she looked paler than the night before. Her lips trembled faintly as she gestured towards the window. "I thought the mist would lift this morning," she said. "It has not. Ravenscroft always seems wrapped in it when trouble comes." Poirot inclined his head. "It is the mist, madam, or perhaps it is the mind that perceives the mist as heavier when unease is near." She did not answer, for at that moment the door opened again, and another figure was shown in. This was Dr. Elwood, the village physician, a man of middle years with greying temples, whose smile appeared over-eager, as if painted on to reassure where reassurance was lacking. His manner was brisk, genial, and his clothes suggested he preferred comfort over elegance. Yet Poirot's sharp eyes noted how his hand trembled slightly when he poured himself a cup of tea. "Her ladyship tells me you are here to advise her, Monsieur Poirot," Dr. Elwood said warmly. "A wise choice. These great houses breed anxieties, drafts in the blood, so to speak. But a little rest and some medicinal salts, why, I am sure Lady Amelia will soon feel herself again." Poirot bowed politely. "Perhaps, doctor. But one does not prescribe before diagnosing. We shall see." The physician chuckled, though it rang hollow, and excused himself with talk of patients to be seen in the village. Poirot watched him depart, noting how he cast one last glance towards the great cabinet standing by the wall. Again that cabinet, its polished surface catching the light, its brass keyhole shining faintly. Lady Amelia noticed his gaze. "It contains family papers," she said quickly, her tone defensive. "My late husband's journals, naval records, private letters. There are those who would wish to see them destroyed or exposed. I keep them locked for good reason." "Ah," Poirot murmured. "And do others possess the key?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Only I." Poirot did not press further, but he filed away the information. In his experience, a locked cabinet was never merely a locked cabinet. Later that morning, Poirot was introduced to the other members of the household. Henry Harwood appeared again, grim and restless, his dark eyes smouldering with resentment. He greeted Poirot with civility but without warmth, and when his mother retired briefly to speak with the housekeeper, Henry seized the moment. "My mother has no need of your services, Monsieur Poirot," he said sharply. "She has suffered delicate health for years and is prone to fancies. Talk of crimes yet to be committed. It is nonsense, old wives' nonsense. You may make a reputation in London for solving murders, but here there is nothing for you." Poirot smiled gently. "And yet, monsieur, if there is nothing, why are you so anxious that I depart?" Henry's colour darkened. He muttered something inaudible and left the room with heavy strides. Poirot permitted himself a small shrug. "So easily provoked. That is always of interest." Soon after, Poirot encountered Clara Fielding in the conservatory, where she pretended to busy herself with the withered plants. The glass panes above rattled faintly in the wind, and her delicate figure seemed fragile among the shadows. "You find the air oppressive here, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked softly. She started, nearly dropping the pot she held. "Yes, no, that is to say, Ravenscroft is very old, and old houses have moods, don't they? I do what I can to make her ladyship comfortable, but she is often distressed." Poirot regarded her keenly. "You have been in her service long?" "2 years," Clara answered quickly. "She has been most kind to me. I owe her everything. Everything. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she turned away, dabbing at her eyes. Poirot, though outwardly courteous, felt his curiosity sharpen. Gratitude, dependence, fear, the mixture was potent. Clara Fielding knew more than she wished to say. The final member of the circle was Mr. Oliver Trent, introduced over luncheon. He was a stout, ruddy man of perhaps 50, his fingers ink-stained from perpetual note-taking. An antiquarian of sorts, he boasted of his collection of naval memorabilia and pressed Lady Amelia with questions about the relics of her late husband. "The Admiral's compass, surely you still have it?" Trent asked eagerly. "A most valuable artifact. And his sea journal, such historical importance. Scholars would delight in examining them." Lady Amelia's face hardened. "Those relics are mine, Mr. Trent. My husband entrusted them to me. They are not for public display." Poirot observed the exchange, noting how Trent's eyes gleamed with avid curiosity, while Lady Amelia's hand trembled as it reached for her wine glass. The luncheon ended in strained politeness, conversation faltering into silence. Poirot, ever alert, saw how each face bore its private shadow, Henry's brooding hostility, Clara's nervous apprehension, Trent's acquisitive gleam, and Lady Amelia's haunted gaze. Only the doctor was absent, though his presence still lingered in Poirot's thoughts. That evening, as the lamps were lit and the mist deepened outside, Poirot took a solitary walk through the corridors. His step was soft, but his eyes missed nothing. He paused before the locked cabinet once more, studying it with quiet intensity. Something about it called to him, the sense of secrets coiled within, secrets that weighed upon the house itself. He touched the brass keyhole lightly, as though it might confide in him. Then, adjusting his cuffs, he whispered, "Patience, mon ami. Soon, the truth will speak." And as he turned back towards the drawing room, a faint sound caught his ear, like the whisper of wings, soft and fleeting. He looked up sharply, but the corridor was empty. Only a white feather, small and delicate, lay upon the carpet at his feet. Poirot stooped, picked it up, and slipped it into his pocket with a grave expression. "Yes," he said softly. "It begins." Chapter 3, The Uneasy Supper. Evening fell early at Ravenscroft Hall, the mist settling against the windows like a curtain of damp wool. The corridors grew dim as lamps were lit, their glow doing little to dispel the shadows that gathered in corners. Poirot, punctual as ever, presented himself in the dining hall at the appointed hour, dressed with the immaculate care that never deserted him, dark suit pressed to perfection, patent shoes gleaming, and his famous moustaches brushed to military symmetry. The dining room itself was a cavernous chamber with a ceiling that seemed to vanish into darkness. A fire burned in the great hearth, but its warmth was feeble against the chill of the stone walls. Along the length of the table gleamed silver and crystal, though the atmosphere around it was far from festive. Poirot took his seat with measured politeness and let his little grey cells observe. Lady Amelia presided at the head of the table, her figure upright despite her obvious frailty. To her right sat Henry Harwood, her son, who poured himself wine with a hand too eager, his glass rarely empty. His expression was one of controlled impatience, as if he longed for the meal to end before it began. Opposite him was Clara Fielding, pale and fluttering, her eyes darting nervously whenever Henry shifted in his chair. Beside her, Mr. Oliver Trent held forth with booming cheer, filling silences with anecdotes of antiquarian discoveries and naval relics. At the far end, Dr. Elwood, summoned back to dine, laughed obligingly at Trent's stories, though his gaze drifted too often toward Lady Amelia with something Poirot could not quite approve. The meal began with a thick soup, served in ornate bowls. Poirot, with his dainty fastidiousness, tasted little but watched much. He saw how Henry gripped the stem of his wine glass as though it were a weapon, how Clara's spoon trembled against the china, how Lady Amelia forced herself to eat though each mouthful seemed an effort. It was Mr. Trent who first disrupted the uneasy silence. "Tell me, Lady Amelia," he said, his fork clattering against his plate, "is it true your late husband kept a log of every voyage? Such a treasure for history. I've long hoped to study it. The Naval Society in London would pay handsomely for such a relic." Lady Amelia's hand, lifting her glass, froze mid-air. Her lips tightened. "My husband's journals are private. They were written for his eyes alone, and mine. They will remain so." Trent chuckled awkwardly. "But think, madam, what knowledge they might reveal, naval maneuvers, accounts of battles. Why, the compass alone." Henry's voice cut across him. "Enough, Trent. If my mother says no, then no. She is mistress of Ravenscroft, and her word is final." Trent reddened, muttered apologies, and busied himself with his meat. Poirot, however, caught the faint tremor in Lady Amelia's hand as she set down her glass. Something in Mr. Trent's pressing had touched a nerve. The conversation staggered on, with Clara attempting timid small talk about the weather and Dr. Elwood soothingly recommending tonics for Lady Amelia's health. Yet beneath the words lay silence, a silence that gnawed at the edges like rats beneath a floor. Poirot felt it keenly, the silence of things unsaid, of fear unvoiced. The second course was barely underway when it happened. A sudden crash shattered the uneasy atmosphere. One of the tall windows along the dining room wall burst inward with a sharp report, scattering shards of glass across the carpet. The draught extinguished 2 candles and set the others flickering wildly. Clara cried out, clutching her napkin to her breast. Henry swore under his breath and half rose from his chair. Lady Amelia gave a stifled gasp and sagged back against her seat, her face ashen. Poirot, calm amid the commotion, rose neatly and approached the window. No storm raged outside, no gale to explain the breakage. The mist pressed close against the shattered panes, silent and still. Upon the carpet, glittering with fragments of glass, lay something that did not belong. Poirot bent and lifted it carefully, a white feather, long and immaculate, its softness incongruous against the jagged shards. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his eyes narrowing. He turned to the others and held it aloft. "You see, messieurs, mesdames, this is no accident of nature. Someone wished to make an impression, most dramatic." Lady Amelia's hand went to her throat. "It begins," she whispered, her voice scarcely audible. "I told you, it begins." Dr. Elwood was instantly at her side, pressing her hand, murmuring reassurances. "Calm yourself, Lady Amelia. It's a trick of the night, nothing more. A stray bird, perhaps." Poirot cut in smoothly. "Non, docteur. A bird does not leave so deliberate a token. The feather, it is placed, not dropped." Henry glared. "Are you suggesting one of us broke the window, Poirot? That's absurd. Who would smash their own glass to scatter feathers around like a child?" Poirot gave a delicate shrug. "Absurd, yes, yet crimes, monsieur, are often absurd in their appearance. But always they obey psychology. The choice of the feather, symbolic. It is cowardice, betrayal, or perhaps a private message known only to Lady Amelia." All eyes turned to her. Lady Amelia pressed trembling fingers against her lips, her eyes wide with dread. For a long moment she did not speak. Then, in a whisper, "The feather marks the chosen." Her words chilled the air. Clara stifled another sob, and Henry swore again, this time more violently. Trent muttered something about childish theatrics, though his ruddy face had paled. Poirot slipped the feather carefully into his pocket, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps, Lady Amelia, you will tell us more of this meaning. But not tonight. Tonight, we must preserve calm." The rest of the meal proceeded in near silence. Each person ate mechanically, eyes darting toward the broken window as though another intrusion might come at any moment. The servants cleared away the plates in nervous haste, the sound of cutlery against porcelain unnaturally loud in the hushed hall. When at last the company rose, Poirot lingered by the fire. He studied each face as they departed, Henry striding away in irritation, Clara clinging to Lady Amelia's arm, Trent avoiding everyone's eyes, Elwood murmuring reassurances with forced joviality. Poirot alone seemed tranquil, but inside his mind the little grey cells were stirring rapidly. The feather was no random token. It was a signal, a mark, a deliberate act designed to instill fear. And it had succeeded. When the hall was empty, Poirot bent once more to the shattered glass. There, faintly visible among the shards, was a muddy print, no larger than a coin, left by the edge of a boot. Not large enough to be deliberate, but enough for Poirot. He noted its shape, its angle, and tucked the observation away. "OUI," he murmured softly, straightening. "The stage is set. The drama, it begins." Outside, the mist clung close against the stone walls of Ravenscroft Hall, as though listening. Somewhere far off, a raven croaked, its harsh cry echoing through the night. Chapter 4, Whispers in the Night. The events of supper had left Ravenscroft Hall unsettled. The servants cleared the last shards of glass with trembling hands, and though the curtains were drawn across the broken window, the cold mist still seemed to seep through, bringing with it the unease of something uninvited. Lady Amelia retired early to her chambers, leaning heavily upon Clara Fielding's arm, while Dr. Elwood hovered solicitously until she dismissed him. Mr. Trent withdrew to the library with mutterings about historical manuscripts, and Henry vanished with a bottle of brandy under his arm. Poirot, outwardly serene, remained a while in the dining hall, gazing into the fire as if lost in thought. When the grandfather clock in the corridor struck 11, Poirot rose, extinguished the lamp, and slipped silently into the dim corridor. Though he valued his sleep as much as his digestion, he knew that the truth of a household often revealed itself not in the daylight hours, when masks were worn, but in the restless, shadowed quiet of night. The corridors of Ravenscroft Hall were long and draughty, lined with faded portraits that seemed to lean forward as he passed, their painted eyes full of old disapproval. The floorboards creaked underfoot, but Poirot's step was precise, noiseless, his ears alert to every murmur. It was near the drawing-room that he heard them first, voices, low and urgent. He paused by the door, ajar by a narrow crack, and tilted his head. Inside, Clara Fielding stood with her hands pressed together, her fair head bowed. Her voice trembled. "Henry, please, I beg of you. You must not press her so. She is not strong enough. You'll break her." Henry's reply came, deep and harsh. "She has held power over us long enough. That diary, those papers, she means to ruin me. If she will not yield them, then she forces my hand." Clara gasped softly. "But there must be another way. Think of what it would do to you if anyone discovered." The rest was muffled as Henry turned his back, but Poirot had heard enough. His eyes narrowed, moustaches quivering with indignation. He stepped back into the shadow until the door creaked again and the figures slipped away, Clara in tears, Henry grim and silent. Poirot did not reveal himself. Discretion, he knew, was the detective's greatest weapon. Better to let the drama play out while he arranged its scenes in order. He continued his circuit of the house. As he passed along the west corridor, something caught his eye, a faint gleam at the end, where the cabinet stood in its usual sentinel position. The gleam came from the keyhole. Poirot approached, bending close. The brass bore fresh scratches, tiny but unmistakable, as though someone had only just tried, and failed, to force it open. Poirot pressed the handle lightly, the cabinet was locked fast. He straightened, eyes glittering. "Someone seeks the past," he murmured. "But for what? Protection, or exposure?" He turned away, and as he did so, he caught the faintest sound, the rustle of movement, perhaps cloth against wood. He spun sharply, but the corridor was empty. Only silence remained, deep and watchful. Poirot returned to his own chamber at last. He seated himself neatly on the edge of his bed, placed his patent shoes side by side with military precision, and sat in thought. The house was full of fear. Clara feared Henry. Henry feared exposure. Lady Amelia feared the feather and what it signified. Dr. Elwood, with his watchful eyes, feared something still unspoken. And Mr. Trent, he feared being denied his treasures, yet coveted them all the more. Poirot clasped his hands together, fingertips touching. Yes, he whispered, each fears, each hides. But fear, it betrays. It drives one to reckless action. Tonight, I have seen enough to be sure of the danger. It is within the family itself. The feather is but the mask. The next morning dawned grey and listless. Ravenscroft Hall seemed to groan beneath the weight of its own silence. The mist had not lifted, if anything, it pressed closer still. Over breakfast, the household gathered, though their spirits were dampened. Lady Amelia did not appear. Henry slouched over his coffee, silent and brooding. Clara scarcely touched her toast. Dr. Elwood buttered his bread with exaggerated cheer, while Trent discoursed loudly on naval history, as if noise alone might banish the memory of last night's disturbance. Poirot ate delicately, as ever, his eyes taking in the small details, the tremor of Clara's hand as she lifted her cup, the smear of mud at the edge of Henry's trousers, the faint smudge of ink upon Trent's cuff. At last, Clara rose and excused herself, saying she must attend to Lady Amelia. The door closed behind her. Poirot set down his knife with precision. Messrs, he said calmly, last night a window is broken, and upon the floor is left the feather. Tell me, do any of you believe it is the act of a ghost? Trent snorted. Superstition and nothing more. A prank, perhaps, played by some servant. Dr. Elwood smiled tolerantly. If Lady Amelia is inclined to see omens in feathers, Monsieur Poirot, that is her delicacy of mind. We must not indulge her too much. Henry muttered into his cup. Poirot's gaze lingered on him a moment longer, then moved on. When the breakfast was cleared, Poirot took a solitary stroll outside. The grounds were vast, rolling down into wooded hills, but the mist gave them an air of imprisonment rather than freedom. He paused near the stables, where Henry's boots had left a trail in the wet earth. He bent low, examining the prints with satisfaction, the same sole pattern as the faint mark he had seen by the shattered window. Poirot straightened, his moustaches stiff with determination. So, he murmured, the sun plays a part. But is he the author, or only a performer in a greater play? That evening, Poirot once more paced the halls. His little grey cells told him the game was moving swiftly now. The attempted forcing of the cabinet, the whispered quarrel, the feather upon the glass, it was a pattern forming, though its outline remained elusive. And then, at midnight, a sound broke the silence, the faint cry of a woman, muffled but sharp, echoing faintly through the halls. Poirot sprang up, dressing gown tight around him, and hurried toward the source. But when he arrived, the corridor was empty. Only the cabinet remained, dark and still. Yet something was different. The faint outline of dust upon its top surface bore a new disturbance, as if a hand had rested there recently. Poirot touched it lightly, then nodded to himself. "Oh, he whispered. The hand reaches closer. Soon, it will strike openly." And in the silence of Ravenscroft Hall, a single feather drifted down the stairwell, catching the lamplight before settling upon the carpet at his feet. Poirot bent and picked it up. His expression was grave, but his eyes shone with fierce intelligence. "The warning," he murmured. "The threat. But against whom?" He slipped the feather into his pocket. The night pressed on, heavy with expectation, as though the house itself held its breath. Chapter 5: The Vanishing. The following morning began with an uneasy quiet. Ravenscroft Hall seemed to crouch under the mist like some great brooding creature, every window darkened, every stone slick with damp. Poirot, as was his custom, rose early and completed his toilette with meticulous care. His moustaches shone with fresh pomade, his tie was arranged with the symmetry of a mathematician's diagram. To Poirot, order in the little things was armor against chaos in the larger ones. Yet as he descended the broad staircase, he sensed immediately that disorder had entered the house. The air felt heavy, as though charged by something unseen. He paused, listening. No servant's clatter from the kitchen, no cheerful greetings. Only silence. Then, a cry. Piercing, frantic. Poirot quickened his pace. It came from Lady Amelia's chambers. Clara Fielding stood outside, pounding on the locked door, her face stricken with terror. "She is gone!" Clara gasped as Poirot approached. "Monsieur Poirot, she is not here, her bed is empty." Poirot's hand was already at the handle. Clara, shaking, produced a key. She unlocked the door, and they entered together. The room was neat, too neat. The fire had burned down to ashes. The curtains were drawn, but the bed was made, its coverlet smooth and untouched, as though no one had slept there. Upon the pillow, stark against the white linen, lay a single white feather. Poirot bent, picking it up delicately between thumb and forefinger. His eyes glittered. So. It has come again. Clara pressed her hands to her mouth. She never left the room after supper, I swear it. I sat with her until she slept. And now she is gone. Poirot examined the chamber with care. There was no sign of struggle, no overturned chair, no displaced rug. Only the locked cabinet against the wall, its polished wood gleaming faintly in the pale light. Poirot approached it and tried the handle. Still locked. Yet the scratches about the keyhole had deepened since the night before. Someone had tried again to force it. Clara's sobbing drew voices from the corridor. Soon Henry Harwood appeared, rumpled from sleep, brandy on his breath. His face darkened at the sight of Poirot. "What's this noise? What's happened?" Poirot turned, feather still in hand. "Lady Amelia is not in her bed, monsieur. She is vanished." Henry stared. "Vanished? Nonsense. She must have risen early. Perhaps she walks in the gardens." Clara shook her head violently. "No, sir. Her shoes are here, her cloak untouched. She would never step outside in the mist without them." Henry swore under his breath, striding to the window and flinging open the curtains. The mist pressed thickly against the glass, reducing the gardens beyond to vague outlines. "She cannot simply disappear," he muttered. At that moment, Dr. Elwood arrived, summoned by a frightened servant. He bustled in, full of forced cheer, but the sight of the empty bed silenced him. "Strange," he said, frowning. "She has been frail. Perhaps a sleepwalk? It happens, particularly under strain." Poirot's eyes flicked to the doctor, sharp as needles. "And yet, doctor, the door was locked from within. How does a sleepwalker relock the door behind her?" Elwood had no answer. Mr. Trent appeared last, his face ruddy, his manner defensive. "All this fuss, are we certain she is not merely hiding? People of delicate nerves do such things, you know, to excite attention." His eyes darted toward the cabinet. "But perhaps she has locked herself away with her papers." "No," Poirot said softly. "Lady Amelia is not in this room. That much is evident." He turned to the assembled household, his posture neat and commanding. "Messrs, Mademoiselle, we must proceed with calm. A search of the grounds will be undertaken at once. Meanwhile, I shall examine the scene. It is here, in these details, that the truth whispers. The search commenced with frantic energy. Servants fanned out across the gardens, Henry stalked toward the stables, and Dr. Elwood declared he would inspect the lake at the edge of the property. Clara, pale and trembling, begged to remain near Poirot. Mr. Trent announced that he would look in the library, though Poirot noted he did not stray far from the hall. Left in relative quiet, Poirot moved methodically through Lady Amelia's chamber. He noted the pressed-down cushion of her chair by the hearth, the faint scent of lavender water at the dressing table, the impression of a small object once resting on the cabinet's surface. He checked the wardrobe, gowns hung neatly, none missing. Her slippers remained by the bed. Only one thing was gone. On the desk lay a small rectangle of dust, the outline of a book recently removed. Poirot traced it with a fingertip. A diary, he murmured. Yes. The Admiral's diary, perhaps. That is what vanishes with Lady Amelia. His little grey cells hummed. A locked cabinet, repeatedly attacked. A diary, spirited away. A feather, always left behind like a calling card. And a woman who spoke of being chosen. Poirot stepped back into the corridor. Clara trailed behind him, wringing her hands. Monsieur Poirot, what shall we do? What if she is lost, if she has been taken? He looked at her keenly. Mademoiselle, when you sat with Lady Amelia last night, did she speak of her fears? Clara hesitated, then whispered, she said the feather would come again. She said it marked her, as it once marked others. I did not understand. She wept so bitterly I could only soothe her. Poirot's eyes narrowed. As it once marked others, you say. That is curious indeed. From the far end of the hall came a shout, Henry, his voice raw. Nothing. Not a trace in the gardens. Poirot descended the stairs slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. The household gathered in the great hall, each face etched with anxiety or anger. She has been taken, Henry declared. By whom, I cannot say. But mark me, Poirot, if you do not find her soon, I shall call the police. Poirot inclined his head. You may do as you wish, monsieur. But consider, a police search may reveal things that perhaps you do not wish revealed. Henry stiffened, colour rising in his cheeks. Clara made a small sound, half gasp, half protest. Trent shifted uneasily, and Elwood coughed into his hand. Poirot's gaze swept them all. None. The answer is not in the mist, nor in the lake, nor even in the gardens. It is here, within these walls. Lady Amelia has not left Ravenscroft Hall. Of that, I am convinced. A silence fell. The feather lay on the hall table, stark against the dark wood, mute and sinister. Poirot regarded it a final time before slipping it into his pocket. The feather marks the chosen, she said. But the question, Miss Amiss, is not who is chosen, it is who does the choosing. Chapter 6, The Diary Secret. By midday, Ravenscroft Hall was restless. The servants whispered in corners, glancing nervously at the stairwell, as though Lady Amelia might descend at any moment from some ghostly realm. Henry prowled the halls with the temper of a caged animal, Clara clung to the shadows with red eyes, and Trent lingered by the library fire, pipe in hand, his jovial manner forced. Dr. Elwood made a great show of calm efficiency, but the tightness of his jaw betrayed strain. Into this uneasy stage stepped Poirot, calm as ever, hands folded neatly behind his back, moustaches perfectly symmetrical. He did not rush, for to hurry was to miss the delicate embroidery of detail. And detail was everything. He began once more in Lady Amelia's room, this time alone. The feather lay absent from its pillow, Poirot had secured it. The cabinet still resisted intrusion, its lock scarred by furtive hands. But Poirot's eyes were drawn again to the faint outline upon the writing desk, the rectangular patch of dust where a book had once rested. Yes, the diary. He could almost see it, its worn leather cover, the faded ink within. And now it was gone, spirited away during the night. Poirot bent low, studying the desk surface. A faint trail of powder, dust disturbed, ran from the empty patch toward the window. He followed it, pausing at the sill. There, upon the ledge, was a single smudge, faint but distinct, ink, as if the corner of a book had brushed it. He nodded. So. The diary was taken through the window. Not by Lady Amelia herself, for she had neither strength nor inclination, but by another hand. Poirot opened the window. The mist rolled in, cool and damp. Below lay the terrace, its flagstones dark with moisture. He leaned out carefully. The stone bore marks, not footprints precisely, but the faintest scrape of leather against the wet. Someone had climbed, or dropped down, carrying the diary. Poirot closed the window gently, his mind already leaping ahead. The cabinet, it resists all efforts. But Lady Amelia, she feared the feather and what it meant. Perhaps, to guard against intrusion, she kept the diary near her, hidden not in the cabinet but upon her desk. Yes. And someone, knowing this, seized it. His gaze shifted to the wardrobe. It was still neat, gowns aligned with military order. Yet he noticed one space, narrow, but visible, between a dark wool dress and a lighter silk. Poirot slipped a hand between them. His fingers brushed a scrap of paper, folded small. He withdrew it carefully. The handwriting was hurried, almost frantic. It comes again. The feather marks me. If the truth is read, then all shall know. The Admiral kept it, though he swore to silence. They will not forgive. Poirot folded the note, tucking it into his pocket. ABN. So the Admiral, he kept a truth, and Lady Amelia feared its revelation. A family truth, perhaps, one that burned still. At luncheon, Poirot rejoined the others. The dining room felt oppressive, as though the air itself carried accusation. Henry ate little, his fork clattering against his plate. Clara barely touched her soup. Trent, however, launched into a monologue on the naval victories of Admiral Harwood, extolling his brilliance, his honor, his spotless reputation. Poirot listened politely, his eyes upon Trent's ink-stained cuff. At last he interjected, softly, "Tell me, monsieur, you admire the Admiral greatly, do you not?" "Admire?" Trent puffed up. "The man was a genius. I have studied his campaigns for years. If only Lady Amelia would grant me access to his private papers, imagine the revelations. Historians would be indebted for generations. And yet," Poirot said, "imagine also the danger, if such papers held something less glorious. A secret not of triumph, but of shame." The table stilled. Clara gasped softly. Henry's fork froze midway to his mouth. Elwood cleared his throat, sharp and awkward. Trent flushed. Nonsense. The Admiral was beyond reproach. Only the envious would suggest otherwise. Poirot inclined his head. Perhaps. And yet someone has sought his diary most desperately. Someone who fears what it contains. Henry banged his fist upon the table. "You speak in riddles, Poirot. If you know something, say it plain." Poirot's eyes lingered on him, cool and calm. "I know this, monsieur, Lady Amelia did not vanish of her own will. She was removed, or compelled. And it is tied, most intimately, to the diary." That evening, as the mist deepened into night, Poirot requested the household gather in the drawing room. The fire burned brightly, casting long shadows upon the walls. "Miss Amos," Poirot began, standing before them, "the feather is not a ghost's token. It is a symbol, left by a hand of flesh and blood. Lady Amelia feared it because it was used before, against others. She believed herself chosen, as once others were. This is no superstition, but a weapon of psychology." Clara trembled. But who would torment her so cruelly? Poirot's gaze swept the room. "That is the question, mademoiselle. Consider, Henry fears exposure, Clara fears loss, Dr. Elwood fears ruin, and Mr. Trent fears denial of knowledge. Each has reason to desire the diary hidden, or destroyed." Elwood bristled. "You cannot suggest." "I suggest nothing, Doctor. I observe. And my observation is this: the diary has been removed. The lock of the cabinet shows repeated attack. But Lady Amelia, in her wisdom, did not keep it there. She kept it close, upon her desk. Last night, it was stolen, carried out by the window. I know this, for the dust and the ink upon the sill tell me so." Henry sprang up. "Then we must search the grounds again. Whoever has it must have hidden it outside." Poirot raised a hand. "None. To hide a thing is to risk its loss. Whoever took it keeps it close. I advise you, messrs, to watch your companions closely this night. The thief is among us." A tense silence followed. Clara clutched her hands together, eyes darting from face to face. Trent puffed furiously on his pipe, Elwood tapped his fingers, and Henry stared at Poirot with barely veiled hostility. Poirot smiled faintly, though his eyes were hard. "As for myself, I shall not search. The diary will return to me of its own accord. For a thing so full of danger cannot remain long in the hands of its possessor. It burns, it poisons. And in desperation, they will reveal themselves." He bowed slightly, turned on his heel, and left the room. Later that night, in the silence of his chamber, Poirot sat upright in his chair, listening. The house was restless, footsteps padding in corridors, doors closing softly, a cough muffled in the dark. Poirot's moustaches quivered. The play was reaching its climax. And then, at his door, a sound. A rustle, a faint scrape, as though something slid across the floor. Poirot rose at once, opening the door. The corridor was empty. Only a small bundle lay upon the carpet. He stooped, lifting it. Wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. He carried it to the desk, unwrapped it carefully. The Admiral's diary. Poirot opened it, turning the brittle pages. Ink faded, words cramped, but their meaning plain. His eyes narrowed, his lips pursed. "So," he whispered. "This is the truth Lady Amelia feared. This is the shadow that follows the feather." He closed the book, laying it neatly before him. "Now I understand. And soon they too will understand. The silent guest, it is not the feather nor the ghost. It is the past." Chapter 7, The Unmasking. The following morning broke without colour. The mist still clung to Ravenscroft Hall, so thick it seemed to have settled inside the very walls. Breakfast was subdued, the clatter of silverware echoed too loudly in the hush. None dared meet the eyes of another for long. Poirot entered last, impeccable as ever, the diary tucked discreetly under his arm. His presence drew every gaze, though none could summon the courage to ask what he carried. He sat down at the table with a small bow, as though this were no more than another morning in a genteel household. He buttered his toast, sipped his chocolate, then spoke with deceptive mildness. "Miss Amos, it is curious, is it not, how a house grows smaller when a secret grows larger? Already I see it pressing in upon you, crushing you. But courage, the truth, it must be faced." Clara's spoon clattered into her saucer. Henry scowled into his coffee. Trent stared with an odd, fixed fascination at the diary Poirot had placed beside his plate. Elwood cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. Poirot tapped the cover with one finger. The Admiral's diary. It returned to me last night, left at my very door. This tells me two things. First, that the thief who took it has more fear of exposure than of discovery, and second, that its contents are of the gravest importance. Returned. Henry growled. Then you know who. Poirot raised a hand. Patience. The little grey cells, they must order the facts. Consider the Admiral. He was a hero of the sea, yes? Yet heroes, they too are men, and men are subject to folly, even to shame. Trent shifted uncomfortably. I will not hear the Admiral maligned. Poirot's eyes glittered. Ah, but you will, monsieur. For the diary records not triumphs only, but a scandal long buried, a betrayal during his command, a cowardice concealed by clever words. He feared it would destroy his name, yet he kept the record. And Lady Amelia, his widow, feared what revelation might mean. This is why she trembled at the feather. For once before, the feather marked those who knew. The room stilled, thick with tension. Poirot let the silence linger before continuing. Now, let us see who among you trembles most at this truth. Monsieur Trent, you hunger for the diary. You speak always of history, of honour, of scholarship. Yet your eagerness, it is too great. Last night, you tried the cabinet again. The scratches on the lock, they are of your making. Trent's face flamed. I merely wish to verify its contents. To prove the Admiral's greatness. Or his disgrace, Poirot said softly. But you, monsieur, you are too proud of your pursuit. You did not steal the diary. Poirot's gaze shifted. Dr. Elwood. You speak always of calm, of reason. Yet I observed you, 2 nights past, standing watch too long outside Lady Amelia's chamber. And you, more than any, would fear the revelation of cowardice, for it would endanger your place here, the physician to a family shamed. Is that not so? Elwood's mouth twitched. Ridiculous. My position depends on my skill, not on gossip. Ah, Poirot murmured, but gossip destroys reputations faster than illness destroys the body. And yet, you two are not the thief. You fear, but you did not act. His gaze turned to Henry. The young man stiffened, brandy still on his breath. You, monsieur, you quarrelled with Lady Amelia. You feared her power, her control over the estate. If the truth of the Admiral's shame came out, it would cast shadow upon you also. And you said the words yourself, she forces my hand. Henry surged to his feet. Enough. You accuse us all like children at a school lesson. If you know who took it, say it plain. Poirot's voice cut like a blade. Sit down, monsieur. It is Clara who has the key. All turned. Clara froze, pale as the mist outside. Poirot leaned forward. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. Yes, mademoiselle. You sat with Lady Amelia, comforted her, whispered to her. She trusted you. And yet, it was you who crept back, who lifted the diary from her desk, who carried it out the window. You left it at my door, for the weight was too great, n'est-ce pas? You could not bear it. Clara's lips parted, but no sound came. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. I only meant to protect her, she whispered at last. She was terrified. She said the feather marked her, that the truth would destroy us all. She begged me to take it away. I thought, if I hid it, she would rest. Poirot's eyes softened, though his voice remained firm. You acted from pity, perhaps even from love. But you see, mademoiselle, in so doing, you endangered her more. For now she is gone, and the truth remains hidden. A silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Henry's fists clenched, Elwood stared at the carpet, Trent wiped his brow. Only Poirot seemed untouched by the oppressive air. At last, Clara whispered, "Do you mean, she has been taken because of the diary?" Poirot rose, drawing himself to full height. "Yes. Lady Amelia vanished not by chance, but by design. The diary, it is at the heart. But mark me, Miss Amos, she is still within these walls. Ravenscroft Hall itself hides her. And tomorrow, when all is clear, I shall show you where and who has placed her there." He gathered the diary, tucked it once more beneath his arm, and bowed. "Until then, Miss Amos, guard your nerves. The truth, it waits just one night more." Poirot left them in stunned silence, his polished shoes clicking lightly upon the wooden floor. Behind him, the household remained frozen, each face a mask of guilt, fear, or rage. And in the hall outside, the grandfather clock struck noon, its chime echoing like the toll of judgment. Chapter 8: The Silent Guest. The drawing room of Ravenscroft Hall was lit by the low glow of the fire and the pale lanterns set about the walls. Mist pressed against the windows like an eavesdropper, and the whole house seemed to hold its breath. Poirot stood before the assembled household, immaculate as ever, the Admiral's diary in his hands. Henry sat stiffly in his chair, his jaw tight. Clara's hands were folded in her lap, trembling. Dr. Elwood stood near the mantel, feigning calm but with restless eyes. Mr. Trent hovered by the shelves, his pipe unlit, his gaze darting greedily toward the diary. Poirot inclined his head. "Miss Amos, the time has come. You have waited, you have feared, and you have whispered in corners. But tonight," his voice sharpened, "tonight we shall end the masquerade. The feather has drifted long enough. It is time we see who dropped it." A silence, broken only by the fire's crackle. Poirot began to pace slowly, his shoes clicking against the floor. "Let us recall, yes? Lady Amelia received the feather, and she trembled. It was not the first time. She said others before her were chosen. She spoke of a past long buried." "What past?" "That which lives here," he raised the diary, in the words of Admiral Harwood himself. He opened the book, though he did not read. The diary tells us of cowardice. During an engagement at sea, the Admiral faltered, withdrew his men, and cost lives. He covered it with clever reports, spoke of strategy, of necessity. But in his heart he knew. He recorded it, unable to destroy the truth. That is what he feared might one day be read. Trent blustered. "Lies! A great commander must sometimes choose retreat." "Non, monsieur," Poirot interrupted. This was not retreat but fear. He confessed it in his own hand. And Lady Amelia, she feared the ruin of his name. She kept the diary hidden. She trembled each time the feather appeared because it was the very symbol of cowardice, the white feather. Someone knew of this, and someone used it against her. Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Now let us ask, who?" His gaze swept the room. "Monsieur Trent? You sought the diary, yes, but for glory, not malice. You scratched at the cabinet in desperation. Yet you did not vanish Lady Amelia." Trent's flush deepened. "I wanted only to prove him a hero." Poirot continued, turning to the doctor. "Dr. Elwood? You hovered like a watchful bird. But your fear was not of the Admiral's past, it was of your future. The scandal would drive you from this comfortable post. Yet you had no strength for such daring acts." Elwood stiffened. "I resent the implication." Poirot ignored him, his eyes finding Henry. "Monsieur Harwood, you quarrelled with your stepmother. You feared her power, her hold upon the estate. But yours was the impatience of the drunkard, not the cunning of the schemer. You bluster, but you do not plot. Henry's fist struck the arm of his chair. And what of Clara? You said she took the diary. Poirot turned at once to Clara, who shrank beneath his gaze. Yes, mademoiselle. You took it at Lady Amelia's request, meaning only to hide it. But you returned it to me. You are not cruel enough for what followed. The air thickened. Clara whispered, then who? Poirot straightened, his voice ringing clear. The culprit, Miss Amice, is Dr. Elwood. All turned. Elwood's eyes widened, but his smile came swiftly, almost too swiftly. Surely you jest. I am a physician, devoted to her care? Why would I? Because, Poirot cut in, you knew the truth of the Admiral's shame. You were among the very few to whom Lady Amelia confided. You used the feather to torment her, weakening her already fragile mind, to keep her pliant under your control. When she resisted, when she clung too fiercely to the diary, you took action. Elwood's hands twitched. Preposterous. Poirot's eyes glittered. Preposterous? Non-logical. Consider, the cry heard at midnight, faint and muffled. The disturbance upon the cabinet's dust. Lady Amelia was taken then, not spirited into the mist, but hidden here, in her own house. Where could she be concealed, where none would think to look? Poirot moved to the far wall, to a tall tapestry hanging beside the cabinet. With a sudden tug, he swept it aside. Behind lay a narrow door, almost invisible in the panelling. He pulled it open. A narrow staircase yawned into darkness. From its depths came a sound, a faint rustle, a stifled moan. Clara gasped, surging forward. Poirot raised a hand to still her, then descended swiftly. Moments later, he returned, supporting Lady Amelia herself, pale, trembling, but alive. A cry went up. Clara rushed to her, Henry stumbled back, Trent muttered in shock. Poirot's voice was calm, firm. He hid her in the servants' passage, intending that her weakness, her terror, would grow until none questioned her absence, or his authority as her physician. And when the time was right, he would discover her, weak and broken, her resistance gone. But he did not count upon Hercule Poirot. Lady Amelia clung to Clara, whispering brokenly, "The feathers, he said they meant I was chosen, that I must keep silent, or be ruined." Poirot's moustaches quivered with indignation. Cruelty beyond measure. He preyed upon her fear, upon the Admiral's shame, upon superstition itself. That, Miss Amice, is the silent guest of this house, not a ghost, but the past, twisted by human malice. Elwood tried to speak, but his words faltered. Poirot's eyes pinned him like a knife. You will say nothing, Doctor. The police will say much. Your game, it is finished. Two servants, summoned by Poirot earlier in anticipation, stepped forward at his nod. Elwood sagged, defeated, as they moved to detain him. Poirot turned back to the household. His voice softened. Lady Amelia, you are safe now. The diary, burn it, if you wish. The Admiral is beyond shame. Let his victories stand, his failures sleep. It is enough that the cruelty ends. Clara held her close, tears falling freely. Henry muttered something like an apology. Trent, shaken, muttered about the tragedy of lost history. Poirot placed the diary upon the mantel, its leather cover gleaming in the firelight. He straightened his cuffs, smoothed his tie, and smiled faintly. Thus ends the matter. You see, my friends, there was no ghost, no spectre of the Admiral. Only men and women, with their fears and their ambitions. Always it is so. And always, Hercule Poirot sees the truth. The clock struck the hour, its chimes echoing through the hall like the closing of a chapter. Poirot bowed, his moustaches immaculate, his eyes calm once more. The silent guest departs, Miss Amiss. Order is restored.